Jacob is given eyes to see a literal troop of angels. Esau is coming with angry intent. Esau and his army of 400 is terrifying. He's already declaring his defeat. But Lord, you told me to return home, and now you'll allow Esau to wipe me out? Jacob thinks. Perhaps he can buy Esau's love and good favour. Jacob is finally going to get a new walk. Jacob was wrestling with Jesus. Jacob uses the final vestiges of his earthly energy in an all-night struggle with God. God's toying with Jacob. Jacob has no strength in himself left to fight. God allowed Jacob to bring himself to his very breaking point. Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. Perhaps it means prince with God, or God wrestler. Jacob had wrestled with his brother, his father, his wives, his children, his flock, his uncle, his pursuit of riches. But after a night wrestling with Jesus, Jacob's walk would never be the same again. Genesis 32 verse 1. So Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's camp." And he called the name of that place Mahanaim, meaning double camp. His covenant with Laban signed in the prior chapter. Jacob's clear of danger from his rear flank. He can now focus his attention on his primary forward danger, Esau. Jacob went on his way and walked into two companies of angels camped together. Eliezer, in Genesis 24, when he travelled the same path as Jacob now, bringing Rebekah to be the wife of Isaac, he was accompanied by a group of protecting men. These men were idiomatic of angels, who were tasked with guarding the walk of the bride of the Son of Promise. In this account, 117 years later, Jacob is given eyes to see a literal troop of angels sent by God to protect Jacob's journey. Was Jacob the only one who could see the angels? Or did his entire travelling group also see them? These scriptures are silent on this question. But the two camps of angels will impact how Jacob deals with his approach to Esau. Verse 3, Then Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. This country of Edom is Moses' commentary. This is the land from which the country of Edom will arise, as it had by Moses' day. Esau, the hairy man, who had moved to the land of Seir, meaning the hairy guys, a perfectly named home for Esau. It's also relevant the Genesis 19 destruction of the cities of the Jordan Valley had earlier cleared the region of the major powers. Remembering also the Genesis 14 War of 9 Kings decimated the established powers in and around Seir. Verse 4, And he commanded them, saying, Speak thus to my lord Esau. Thus your servant Jacob says, I've dwelt with Laban and stayed there until now. I've oxen, donkeys, flocks, and male and female servants, and I've sent to tell my Lord that I may find favour in your sight. Jacob met God's heavenly messengers. This likely gave him the idea to send his earthly messengers to Esau. Notice the humility in Jacob's language. My Lord Esau, and your servant Jacob. It's only taken Jacob 97 years to finally learn some humility. 20 years training in Laban's school of hard knocks has done the trick. He's also telegraphing to Esau, I don't need the double portion of inheritance from Dad. I know I tricked you out of your birthright, Esau, but I don't need any more earthly wealth. Jacob's trying to convey to Esau that he's already acquired great wealth in Padan Aram, but he's trying to declare this without directly referencing his earlier deceitful shenanigans. Verse 6, Then the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, We came to your brother Esau, and he also is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him. Jacob had been traumatized by his narrow escape from the rage of Laban, but now he confronts news of Esau's army of 400 men. These 400 men tells Jacob his brother isn't coming for a 20-year reunion. Esau is coming with angry intent. The news back from his messengers couldn't have been worse. Laban was scary. Esau and his army of 400 is terrifying. Verse 7, So Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people that were with him and the flocks and herds and camels into two companies. And he said, If Esau comes to the one company and attacks it, then the other company which is left will escape. His encounter with the angelic camp, fresh in his mind, he divides his own camp into two companies. At least Jacob intended to get away with half his family and livestock if Esau intended murder. There's a calculated callousness to Jacob that's very unlikable. It's downright ugly. This is not the actions of a good man. This is not the actions of a man of faith. This is the opposite to heroic. The fact he's willing to lose half his family to save his own neck shows what a rat Jacob was. He's learnt from his father and grandfather. They were also willing to sacrifice family to save self. The picturing of all three of the patriarchs as self-centered men willing to ditch their family to save themselves gives the Genesis narrative an authentic feel. Why would the Jews invent such terrible backstories for their hero progenitors? Verse 9, Then Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac. Notice he doesn't say my God, but the God of my dad and grandpa. The Lord who said to me, Return to your country and to your family, and I will declare well with you. He's almost whimpering to God. He's already declaring his defeat. I'm doomed, God. Esau's coming with a mighty army to kill me. But Lord, you told me to return home, and now you'll allow Esau to wipe me out? Verse 10, I'm not worthy of the least of all the mercies and of all the truth which you have shown your servant. Jacob's continued whimperings are disguised in humility now. For I crossed over this Jordan, like a good Hebrew lad, with my staff, and now I have become two companies. I started with nothing, and now have much. Verse 11, Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, and from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he come and attack me, and the mother with the children. For you said, I will surely treat you well, and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. Jacob's prayer comes from terror. What about my wives? What about my children, Lord? Even though he's willing to sacrifice them to save himself. Lord, you promised me descendants as the sand of the sea. Even though he remembers, he's not trusting in God's promises. Verse 13, So he lodged there that same night, and took what came to his hand as a present for Esau his brother. He takes from some of the possessions God gave him from Laban as a present, more a grovelling bribe to be laid before Esau. Verse 14, 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milk camels and their colts, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 foals. Then he delivered them to the hand of his servants, every drove by itself. It seems 5 droves of animals, goats, followed by lambs, then camels, then cows, then donkeys. An incredible collection of wealth, showing the abundance of blessings God had bestowed upon Jacob. And said to his servants, Pass over before me, and put some distance between successive droves. He wants to give Esau some time to contemplate the extent of his grovelling and the size of his generosity. This over-the-top gift showing the realization of just how perverse his earlier duplicity with Esau had really been. Jacob thinks perhaps he can buy Esau's love and good favour. He's still trusting in his own cunning and guile. Verse 17, And he commanded the first one, saying, When Esau my brother meets you, and asks you, saying, To whom do you belong? And where are you going? Whose are these in front of you? Then you shall say, They are your servants Jacob's. It is a present, sent to my lord Esau, and behold, he also is behind us. So he commanded the second and third, and all who followed the drove, saying, In this manner you shall speak to Esau when you find him. And also say, Behold, your servant Jacob is behind us. For he said, I will appease him with the present that goes before me, and afterward I will see his face. Perhaps he will accept me. So the present went on over before him, but he himself lodged that night in the camp. Jacob, despite his 97 years of life experience, is still living as a carnal man. He's seen the incredible hand of God in his life. He's seen the ladder to heaven. He's seen God. He's spoken with God. He's met 2 companies of God's angels. He's acquired great wealth, a huge family. God's delivered him from the angry intentions of Uncle Laban. But still Jacob is not walking by faith, but rather he's walking by the flesh. Jacob's plotting, scheming, manoeuvring, relying on his own intellect, not resting in the promises of God, not trusting in God. Jacob still doesn't have a godly walk. But this night, Jacob is finally going to get a new walk, a new faith, and a new hope in the one true wonderful God. Verse 22. And he arose that night and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed over the ford of Jabbok. And he took them, sent them over the brook, and sent over what he had. Then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. If you're reading along with me in the New King James, you'll have noticed the capitalization of the M in man. A man, capital M, wrestled with Jacob. This is the translator's subtle commentary on who Jacob wrestled with. Jacob was wrestling with Jesus, 2,000 years before Jesus was born and lived in Israel. Here, the pre-existent one turns up in an all-night-long fight with Jacob. Jacob's been struggling and wrestling with everyone his entire life. He was wrestling at his birth with his brother. He wrestled for 77 years with Esau. He wrestled with Isaac. He wrestled with Laban. He wrestled with his 4 wives. This night, he has the audacity to struggle directly with God. He sends everything across the Jabbok, meaning to empty. And now alone, empty, beaten down. Jacob uses the final vestiges of his earthly energy in an all-night struggle with God. Jacob is like so many of us. We struggle and fight and claw our way through life, avoiding fellowship with God, shunning the blessings of God, wanting to do things our way. And God patiently waits for us to give up our struggling and simply surrender to him. He only wants what's best for us. But like Jacob, we wrestle and struggle in carnal ways. He's just escaped the fiery indignation of Laban's fury. Now he confronts the murderous intent of Esau. And rather than spend a night in prayer, he spends the night contending and wrestling with God. Verse 25. Now when he saw that he did not prevail against him, he touched or struck the socket of his hip. And the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled with him. Of course, Almighty God could simply outmaneuver puny Jacob. God is the picture here of a loving father wrestling with his young son, restraining anything like his full strength. I used to have wrestling matches with my older brother Andrew in the lounge room. He'd act as the ring announcer, introducing me with various superlatives. My wrestling name was Little Tojo. Then he'd introduce himself as Andre the Giant, and the wrestling match would begin. He could have dispatched me at any point, but enjoyed allowing me to nearly get him in serious wrestling holds, but always just slip out of the hold before I could finally lock in the winning maneuver. But on one rare occasion, he slipped up, and I finally locked him into the camel clutch. Once you're locked into that hold, there's really nothing much you can do to defend yourself. I remember really stretching Andre the Giant out in that clutch, commentating with glee in my victory, to the point where Andrew really did have to whimper in defeat. God's toying with Jacob, not unlike my brother toying with me. By daybreak, Jacob doesn't have God in a camel clutch like I locked Andre the Giant into. Jacob has no strength in himself left to fight. He's totally empty of strength in the place that means empty. He's just clinging on to Jesus with his final embers of strength. God allowed Jacob to bring himself to his very breaking point. Then we glimpse the true power imbalance. God merely touches Jacob's socket. God's finger on Jacob's socket, and Jacob's hip is painfully dislocated. But Jacob continues to cling to Jesus. When all fight is gone, just cling to Jesus. When all hope is lost, just cling to Jesus. Jacob will learn through this incredible experience to triumph through defeat and to be strong through weakness. Jacob had to be emptied of self before he could confess who he was and before God could rename him. Verse 26, and he said, "Let me go, for the day breaks." But he said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Jacob knows this is God. He's just clinging on so he can receive God's blessing. He wasted the first 77 years of his life plotting and scheming to steal the blessings of Esau, when God had already prophesied that he would be blessed by God. Rather than resting in those promises, he acted carnally, striving to bring about that blessing. And as judgment for his sinful plotting, God exiled him to Syria for 20 years, where God openly continued to pour out his blessings on Jacob for 20 years. Wives, a big family, great wealth. Jacob, stop walking by the flesh and start walking by faith. Verse 27. So he said to him, "What is your name?" He said, "Jacob." And he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed." Remember, whenever God asks a question, he's never in search of information. Jacob replies to God's question, "My name is Jacob, heel grabber, usurper, supplanter, deceiver, hider of intentions, the one full of guile." But God now calls him Israel. The name is intentionally complex. It consists of nuances and facets that have stumped theologians for centuries. Perhaps it means prince with God, or God wrestler, or the one who turns the head of God. When Jacob speaks, God turns and listens. Or maybe he retains God. Verse 29, then Jacob asked, saying, "Tell me your name, I pray." And he said, "Why is it that you ask about my name?" And he blessed him there. Several men in the Old Testament confront God and ask him who he is. Most famously, Moses asked God his name at the burning bush. "I am who I am," is God's reply. Samson's father asked Jesus what his name was. The answer, wonderful, beyond comprehension. Joshua confronted Jesus before Jericho and inquired who he was and whose side he was on, and was told he was the commander of the army of the Lord. When Gideon met Jesus, he declared, "Yahweh Shalom." When Hagar met Jesus, she declared, "The God who sees." After Abraham's Moriah experience, he called the name of the place Jehovah Jireh, the Lord will provide. God has many names in the Bible. Elohim, El Shaddai, the Lord God Almighty. Yahweh Rapha, the Lord heals. Yahweh Shammah, the Lord is there. Yahweh Nissi, the Lord my banner. Yahweh Ra, the Lord my shepherd. In this instance, for reasons not explained, Jacob's question is dismissed. God's blessings would suffice for Jacob. Verse 30. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, or face of God. For I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. Just as he crossed over Peniel, the sun rose on him, and he limped on his hip. Therefore to this day the children of Israel do not eat the muscle that shrank, which is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip in the muscle that shrank. For 97 years Jacob had walked carnally. He walked in the flesh. He walked with a stiff neck and a haughty heart. Jacob had wrestled with his brother, his father, his wives, his children, his flock, his uncle, his pursuit of riches, his desires for Abraham's blessings. He'd wrestled with his desire for the blessings of God. But after a night wrestling with Jesus, Jacob's walk would never be the same again. God brought Jacob to the end of his resources. His walk would forever show the unmistakable visible signs of his personal encounter with Jesus. Does your own walk show the signs of a life lived in service to Jesus? Are you walking in Christ? Are you clinging to Jesus? Are you walking in faith? Or are you wasting your life? Are you wrestling and contending with the troubles of life, walking in the flesh, running from earthly troubles in your own strength as Jacob had for 97 years, till this incredible night that changed his walk? Until our next study, may God richly bless you all.